My name is David Mercer. I'm 32 years old. I grew up in a tight-knit family, worked my way up in a tech startup from intern to senior project manager, and I believed in loyalty above all else. I wasn't the most outspoken person, but my reliability and quiet competence earned me respect, and at times envy. Until one day, I realized I was surrounded by smiles that masked a dagger's edge. I remember the moment of betrayal, as if it were in slow motion. We were in a high-stakes client meeting. Everything on the line. Our entire team pinned our hopes on me to secure the deal, and there she was. Rachel, my colleague and once close confidant. Mid-presentation she interrupted me with a subtle correction that undermined everything I'd built. Her tone, calm, her face, blank. The room tilted. I stumbled. She seized that moment, and from that day forward, something unspoken shifted between us. I couldn't scream or storm out. Instead, I swallowed the shock, nodded with forced composure, and finished the meeting, my heart pounding in my ears. She sat back down, expression cool as ice. In that silent exchange, her eyes on me, I felt the final snap of betrayal. No shouting, no finger-pointing. Just the quiet realization that someone I'd trusted had deliberately shifted the tides against me. When the meeting ended, applause and congratulations were scattered around me, yet I felt hollow. "Amazing save, David," said the CEO, patting my shoulder. I forced a smile, but all I could think was, it wasn't me who saved this, it was her. Trust, I recognized, is a fragile thing, and I had just witnessed its collapse, slow and silent in a boardroom lit by fluorescent lights. Driving home afterward, silence was deafening. Rachel's quiet coo gnawed at me. No confrontation, no explanation, just the unmistakable sting of betrayal. I replayed her words, the diversion, the insinuation, the way she leaned in as I stumbled. There would be no closure in that corporate battlefield. I realized then that anger would do me no good. Only clarity, strategy, emotional strength, quiet power. And so, as I write this, I'm already shifting from hurt to resolve. I'm not here for a spectacle. I'm here for redemption that doesn't scream, it resonates. Because someday Rachel will realize that the most powerful revenge is control regained. But for now, this is just the beginning. In the days that followed, the weight of Rachel's betrayal lingered in everything. In the office hallways, her voice would trail off when I walked by. She smiled at others, but never met my eyes again. That silence between us became louder than any argument could have been. What haunted me more than her action was my failure to see it coming. I had always believed that loyalty bred loyalty, but perhaps it just painted a target on your back. Looking back, the signs were subtle. The sideways glances during meetings, the passive-aggressive jokes about how I always landed on my feet, the way she asked too many questions about my strategies, disguised as curiosity. At the time, I mistook her closeness for camaraderie. I even shared drafts, raw ideas, trusting she'd protect them. But she had been taking notes, not offering support. It was all preparation for that moment in the boardroom, the ambush, the stage she constructed for herself. I began to wonder, had she always envied me? I wasn't flashy or tension-hungry. I let my results speak for themselves. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe my quiet consistency was a threat to someone who needed to be noticed. And when the spotlight landed on me that day, she chose to rip it away rather than earn it herself. It didn't just feel like sabotage, it felt personal. At night I would lie awake, not with rage, but with questions. What was it about me that made someone I trusted want to erase me? What did I represent that made her act so coldly, so decisively? The more I reflected, the more I saw how often I'd ignored the cost of being the quiet backbone. People leaned on me, until they decided I was in their way. And Rachel, she didn't want to share the stage anymore. She wanted it all. But even in that pain, something deeper began to stir. A realization that I had allowed others to dictate the narrative. That my silence, while dignified, had also been passive. It was time to evolve, not into someone louder, but someone more precise. I didn't need to prove myself with noise. I needed to reclaim my presence with direction. Quiet doesn't mean weak, and stillness can be a weapon when wielded with intent. That's when my posture began to shift. Not outwardly, no. I still showed up with the same neutral smile, the same punctual grace. But internally, I began charting a new path. Not to attack, but to outmaneuver. Revenge wouldn't come with confrontation. It would come with transformation. She wouldn't see it coming, because it wouldn't look like a fight. It would look like growth. The turning point came during a quarterly audit. I was reviewing our client retention dashboard, something Rachel rarely bothered with, when I noticed a discrepancy. A key account had dropped off the radar, yet there was no corresponding report or explanation. It wasn't my responsibility to dig deeper, but something told me to. It wasn't about catching her, it was about reclaiming control, quietly, steadily, and without announcing it to anyone. Late nights became my sanctuary. When most of the office had cleared out and the hum of printers softened into silence, I stayed behind. I studied her accounts, her communication patterns, her timelines. Patterns emerged. Sloppy shortcuts, delayed responses, disguised with polished summaries. Numbers dressed to look better than they were. Rachel had gotten too comfortable, too confident, maybe even too greedy. She had wanted my light, but hadn't learned how to maintain it. I began documenting everything, not in anger but in precision. Every anomaly, every overlooked client complaint, every missing follow-up. I built a quiet archive, a mirror of her cracks. I wasn't trying to ruin her. I was preparing to hold up that mirror at the right moment, when silence would speak louder than accusation. My plan wasn't to attack her publicly. My plan was to let her unravel herself gently, but completely. It helped that I had allies I hadn't realized were watching. One evening, our COO Julia passed by as I was finalizing some late revisions. She paused, looked over my shoulder, and casually asked, "Has Rachel been keeping up with these portfolios?" I didn't answer right away. I simply turned my screen slightly toward her. She nodded once, said nothing more, and walked away. In that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. I didn't need to rally a crowd. The truth was already whispering its way through the right corridors. From that point on, I shifted into strategic silence. I smiled when she passed. I responded politely in meetings. I let her believe I was retreating into the background. That was the trap. Because people like Rachel only see silence as surrender. They never suspect that still waters are simply gathering force. And the more she leaned into her facade of success, the more careless she became. She thought she'd won. I kept building. Not just my case against her, but myself. I volunteered for cross-department projects, offered mentorship to junior staff, even started meeting with legal and compliance teams under the guise of policy reviews. Every move I made strengthened my position, not as revenge, but as reinforcement. I wasn't just preparing to rise. I was ensuring that when the storm came, I would be untouchable. It began with a whisper, as all quiet storms do. One of Rachel's clients, a mid-tier account we'd nearly lost, requested a review call. She tried to dodge it, rewrote it to a junior, but the client insisted I join. The moment I entered the call, their tone changed. Their complaints were precise. Missed deliverables, vague updates, and a sense of being managed away. I listened, calmly. I took notes. And when they asked what had changed in our service, I simply replied, "We'll get things back on track." I made no mention of Rachel. I didn't need to. Word began to travel. Other clients started voicing concerns. Patterns that I had been collecting in silence were now surfacing on their own. But I never pointed a finger. Instead, I stepped up, quietly took over accounts, smoothed over tension, offered clarity where there had been confusion. While Rachel tried to control the narrative, I became the solution. The more I rebuilt, the more the team began to see her cracks without my prompting. She grew erratic. Her calm veneer started to fracture, not publicly, but in small telling ways. She'd fumble through presentations she once breezed through, snap at assistants behind closed doors, misplace key documents. I noticed her hovering outside meeting rooms she wasn't invited to, her eyes darting, trying to decipher the silence she once used as a weapon. Now it surrounded her, and it terrified her. Then came the performance review cycle. Unlike the past years, she wasn't glowing in her feedback. There were gaps, subtle but real. Mentions of leadership inconsistency, follow-through concerns, transparency issues. She stormed out of her meeting with HR, face flushed, voice tight. I passed her in the hallway that afternoon. She looked at me, searching for something: anger, pity, a hint of confrontation. I gave her none, just a nod, just the weight of everything unsaid. I wasn't celebrating. There was no satisfaction in watching someone spiral, but I was calm, because I knew every step had been intentional, every move measured. She hadn't just lost control of the team or her role. She had lost control of the illusion she built around herself. And the moment she saw that illusion crumble without anyone raising their voice, she began to understand what quiet power really looks like. The final act came with no audience. A Friday morning, Rachel's name disappeared from the leadership dashboard. No memo, no announcement, just a subtle restructuring. Her office door stayed closed the entire day, and by Monday her nameplate was gone. She left the same way she'd tried to erase me, silently, with a smile that hid the unraveling inside. The office didn't speak of Rachel's departure. No whispers, no water cooler gossip. Just the subtle rebalancing that happens when a storm passes and people begin to breathe again. Her absence wasn't mourned, but it also wasn't mocked. It simply was, and that was the justice of it. Not a dramatic fall from grace, but a quiet fading into the background of a place she once tried to dominate. I never claimed her old position. I didn't have to. Within weeks, my role expanded naturally. Clients she left behind requested me by name. Juniors came to me for guidance. Leadership invited me into rooms I'd once only passed by, not because I asked, but because I had proven, without shouting or spectacle, that consistency and integrity outlast manipulation. My reward wasn't a title, it was trust, real trust. And that was more valuable than any promotion. There was a moment I won't forget. It was during our annual strategic retreat. I was seated near the head of the table, not in Rachel's old chair, but one that had always been mine in spirit. Our CEO turned to me mid-discussion and said, "David, you always manage to steady the room." He didn't know the full story. He didn't need to. That one line held all the validation I'd ever needed. Not for what I endured, but for how I responded. In time, Rachel resurfaced. I heard through a contact that she took a lateral position at a different firm. Same title, less responsibility. Her once bright reputation, now slightly dulled by whispers of inconsistency and team friction. She had built her house on mirrors, and when the light shifted, it all shattered. I never reached out. She never apologized. And strangely, I didn't need her to. Because the moment I stopped needing closure was the moment I became untouchable. People sometimes ask me, quietly, what happened between us. I give the same answer every time. We had different values. I leave it at that. No bitterness, no revenge tale, just a soft boundary, carefully placed. Because the truth is, I never set out to destroy her. I only set out to rebuild myself. And in doing so, the rest took care of itself. I walk differently now, not with arrogance but with clarity. I don't speak to prove my worth anymore. I let my presence carry it. The lesson Rachel taught me was painful, but it also sharpened me. And while she lost herself trying to eclipse others, I found myself in the space where silence became strength. Somewhere along the way, the need for revenge melted into something quieter, something deeper. I no longer replayed that moment in the boardroom or the sting of her betrayal at every turn. It had lost its weight, not because it didn't matter, but because it had already served its purpose. Pain was no longer my anchor. Growth had taken its place. And in that transformation, I found something that Rachel never had: peace, that didn't need an audience. The final closure came in the most unexpected place: a charity gala for local business leaders. I was standing near the back of the hall, drink in hand, nodding politely through small talk, when I saw her, Rachel, across the room in muted beige, clinging to the edge of a different crowd. Her eyes found mine for just a second. She looked away first, not out of shame, but weariness. A quiet acknowledgement passed between us. No nod, no smile, just two people who had traveled opposite roads since the same fork. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. The power of healing is that you no longer seek validation in the place you were hurt. That night, I walked home slowly through the city, past the quiet hum of streetlights and taxis, feeling lighter than I had in years. My story wasn't about her anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. My story was mine again, crafted not from what someone took, but from what I rebuilt in the silence that followed. People often think that revenge has to be loud, that it needs to be televised, explosive, dramatic. But I've learned that the most powerful form of justice is becoming the version of yourself that they can no longer reach. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. I didn't ruin her. I outgrew her. I outlasted her. And perhaps most importantly, I never became her. Today, my days are simpler, quieter. I work, I mentor, I lead. But I don't chase approval. My decisions are intentional. My circle smaller. The battles I fight now are internal. Ego, fear, doubt. And I face them with the same strategy I used in that season of betrayal: patience, precision, and peace. Rachel gave me the wound, but in tending to it I found my spine. If you've ever been betrayed, remember this. Your silence doesn't mean defeat. It means preparation. Let them underestimate you. Let them believe you've faded, because when you rise, not in fire but in calm, unshakable truth, they'll feel it, not as a blow, but as the echo of a power they never understood. And by then you won't need to say a word. After Rachel's exit and the quiet rebalancing that followed, I began to notice something I hadn't expected: how much of my identity had been tied to endurance. For years I had prided myself on being the one who could take the hit, stay calm, remain dependable. But now that the conflict had passed, I found myself asking, who am I when I'm not surviving someone else's storm? The answer didn't come immediately. At first there was a void. I had time, respect, a voice in rooms I'd once silently observed. But I wasn't chasing anything anymore, and that unsettled me. I realized that for years I had been navigating not toward my vision, but away from disappointment. And without that tension, I had to confront something more personal: my own neglected ambitions. So I started over, quietly. I began sketching out the outline of a consultancy firm. not to compete with the company I worked for, but to build something that felt like mine. I poured evenings into business models, refined a quiet plan, just as I had during those nights I investigated Rachel's tactics. But this time, I wasn't protecting myself, I was creating space for myself. During this process, I also reconnected with parts of me that had long gone dormant. I picked up music again, bought an old upright piano, and placed it in the corner of my apartment. I stopped eating dinner at my desk. I took long walks without a destination. I spoke less and listened more. This time, not for danger, but for insight. The tension had left my shoulders, but purpose was taking its place. Some people at work noticed the change. They called it groundedness, presence. What they didn't realize was that I had burned away the part of me that needed validation. In its place stood something softer, but far more durable: self-ownership. I no longer feared being betrayed, because now I could see it coming. But more importantly, I knew I could rise from it without losing my center. The deeper truth is this: surviving betrayal teaches you more about yourself than success ever could. It refines you, sculpts your instincts, and if you let it, it frees you. The day I handed in my resignation wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, respectful, and deeply liberating. I had spent a decade inside those walls, anchoring a system that once disregarded me, but now I was stepping away, not out of spite, but out of alignment. I had outgrown it, and more importantly, I had finally grown into myself. When I told the CEO, he paused. There was no attempt to guilt me into staying. Instead, he said, "You've earned more than just respect here, David. You've earned your freedom." It was the most honest thing he ever said to me. I walked out of that office with no bitterness, just peace, and a laptop bag that held years of experience, and the seed of something new. Starting my own firm was like learning how to breathe differently. There were no politics, no carefully coded meetings, no need to navigate landmines, but there was responsibility, real, raw responsibility. Every client I earned came from the trust I had built silently for years. Every contract was a reflection of my integrity, and in that, I found a new kind of power, the kind that doesn't borrow anyone else's spotlight. I remember the first time I received a handwritten thank you note from a client's CEO. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't public, but it meant everything. It read, "Thank you for restoring our trust in leadership. We didn't know people like you still existed." That moment reminded me why I left, not to prove anything, but to build something rooted in the values Rachel had once tried to destroy in me. I never spoke about her, not even when clients gossiped or when someone from our old circle brought her up. The few times her name surfaced, I simply said, "We walked different paths," because we did. Hers was made of mirrors, mine of stone, slowly laid, one honest decision at a time, and the longer I walked mine, the less hers existed in my rear view. Success came slowly, but it came clean. I hired carefully, treated my team like humans, not pawns. And for the first time, I felt the weight of leadership not as a burden, but as a responsibility I had earned through silence, strength, and unwavering purpose. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when I received the message. A formal inquiry from a major corporate firm seeking consultation. The name of the firm didn't catch my attention at first until I saw the signature at the bottom. Rachel Whitaker. The same woman who once orchestrated my quiet erasure was now listed as Director of Operations, requesting a call. I stared at the email for a full minute, the past rushing in like thunder behind glass. I considered ignoring it. But something in me said no, not out of vengeance, out of readiness. I had nothing to prove, but everything to affirm. I scheduled the meeting. Politely, professionally, It was just business now. My hands didn't shake. My voice was even. I had become the version of myself that betrayal had carved into existence. The video call opened with her face older, sharper, but somehow softer. There was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes when she saw me, like someone trying to remember a dream that once terrified them. "David," she said with a smile that didn't quite land. "It's been a while," I nodded. "It has." Silence lingered. Then we spoke about numbers, metrics, systems, like strangers discussing the weather, though a storm had once lived between us. She didn't mention the past, neither did I. But I noticed something. Her posture was different. Less sure, almost guarded. She needed the consultation. Her company was hemorrhaging resources. I offered solutions without malice, without pride, just clarity, and I could feel her registering it, that I had become someone she couldn't control, dismiss, or predict. When the call ended, she paused. "You built something good," she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a confession. I looked at her, not with contempt, but with perspective. "I built it from what I learned," I said. "Every lesson has a source." She blinked, and for a moment I saw the reflection of her own shadow. Then the screen went dark. I sat there afterward, not triumphant but still. The circle had closed. She had come to me not knowing what it meant, and I had responded, not with the need to win, but with the quiet certainty of someone who already had. There would be no follow-up, no personal words, just two lives that intersected again, one rising, one reaching, and then parting once more. After that call with Rachel, something subtle but permanent shifted in me. It wasn't closure, it was confirmation that I had become untouchable, not by isolating myself from pain, but by walking through it, refining myself with every step. Her reaching out had nothing to do with power anymore. It had everything to do with timing. I had outgrown the version of me who needed to win. Now, I wanted to build. Legacy is a quiet thing. It isn't made of headlines or applause. It's the way your name carries in the room after you've left. It's the systems that keep running because you built them on trust, not ego. As my firm grew, I stopped focusing on success and started focusing on impact. Every hire was intentional, every client relationship deeply human. I had learned that reputation isn't what you say, it's what people feel after working with you. Mentorship became a passion. I began offering weekly calls to young professionals who felt lost in the noise of corporate life. They came with stories, some eerily similar to mine. Betrayals, stolen ideas, being overlooked while louder, flashier names climbed past them. I didn't offer them revenge, I offered them structure, silence, strength. I taught them that real power isn't reactive, it's directional. Some nights I'd sit in my office, lights dimmed, replaying the strange symmetry of my journey, the same traits that once made me a target, my patience, my discipline, my refusal to play games, had become the very foundation of my rise. What had merely broken me had become the blueprint for something unshakable. Not because I wanted to be untouchable, but because I finally understood that nothing external defines your worth. Every so often, someone from my past would reach out, a former colleague, an old client. They'd speak with reverence about the way I handled everything, though few knew the full story. I never filled in the blanks. I let the mystery breathe, because the truth is, the more you mature, the less you need to be understood. You just need to be whole. And so, my legacy was not revenge, it was regeneration. Not a louder voice, but a deeper presence. Not a crown, but a compass for others to follow, quietly. Years have passed now. The firm is stable, the name respected, and my calendar is full, but my soul is quiet. The noise that used to live in my chest, the tightness of needing to prove, to defend, to anticipate sabotage, it's gone. What remains is simplicity, and I've come to realize that simplicity is the final form of mastery. I no longer define myself by what was taken or what I rebuilt. I define myself by what I refused to become. I never mirrored Rachel's tactics. I never retaliated in kind. I didn't chase revenge. I cultivated self-respect, and in doing so, I preserved the one thing betrayal tries to steal: your character. That, above all else, is the victory no one can take away from you. Sometimes, when I visit old colleagues or attend corporate events, I hear whispers about what happened back then. Some details are wrong, some are exaggerated. I let them pass. What matters is that I'm not trying to rewrite history. I'm living proof of it. You don't need to correct every rumor when the truth walks beside you in everything you do. One morning, while walking through the park with a coffee in hand, I saw a young man on a bench staring at his phone, shoulders tense, clearly shaken. Something about him reminded me of myself, years ago, on the verge of being broken by someone's betrayal. I stopped, sat beside him. We talked. I listened more than I spoke. And then I told him something I wish someone had told me: protect your peace, even if it means letting people misunderstand your silence. Your quiet is not weakness, it's just waiting for the right moment to speak. He nodded, not dramatically, just enough to know it landed. That's what healing really is. Not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let it shape you into someone you're not. My story is not about a downfall, it's about dignity. It's not about revenge, it's about restoration. And in the end, it's not about Rachel, it's about who I became when I stopped chasing justice and started embodying it. And now, I live my life, not as a survivor, but as an architect of quiet strength.